Greetings and welcome back to my childhood Cedar Circle. I have lost some footage apparently. Footage of building the houses alongside mine. So you've seen these three houses, you've seen the houses behind mine. I don't know what happened. I lost my intro footage and everything. Somehow I played some custom maps and deleted all the video. Anyway, so this house immediately to our right was owned by a family named the Kahas. And when we first moved in, I can kind of vaguely remember we sort of, greeted the neighbors, but we were never really that friendly with them. I can remember that, and I guess it must have been in the late evenings or late at night. They would sit in this room back here and watch TV. The shades would be drawn, but we could see the flickering of the TV behind the window. I remember that this tree right here was some sort of a tree that had very large seeds, like about the size of your index finger. And one end, like where your fingernail is, was like a little ball, and then the rest of it was a flag. And we called them helicopter seeds, and they would spin as they fell down to the ground. And we used to gather them up and then throw them in the air and watch them spin down to the ground. It was so much fun. But we were very hesitant to go into the yard because sometime after we moved in, they really became kind of nasty people. I don't know how this happened, but they seem to have hated our cat. When I was really little, we had a stray cat that we took in, and sometimes we would let that cat out, and somehow the cat would get into their yard, and they would catch it, and they would either lock it in their shed or lock it in their garage. Usually they'd lock it in the shed, and they wouldn't give it back. Or if we were playing with a ball in the yard and we accidentally kicked the ball over the fence, they would take the ball and not give it back to us. And this was the dad of the family, and my parents used to always yell at them till they gave our stuff back. I think we called the cops on them once when they had our cat locked in the shed. And one time when I was probably in middle school, I think, and I had a cousin who, she was a baby. She was still in her car seat. And it was, I believe, 4th of July. Now, fireworks are illegal in Illinois, by the way. So my mom and dad, we had this little yellow Ford car, I think it was. It wasn't a Nova, Chevy Nova. I forget what it was. Anyway, we pulled up in the driveway. We stopped the car right about here. And I think my dad got out and took the baby seat and put it on the roof of the car to like reach in and grab something else. And they were in the backyard. And I believe the Kahas had two sons who were like maybe high school or college age at this point. They were, one of the sons had died, I believe. And anyway, the dad and the one son were definitely out there shooting off bottle rockets up into the sky. I don't even think I can make, no, there's not really a way for me to make it. Anyway, they were shooting off bottle rockets, and one of them flew right over our car and then burst, and then the hot burning stick fell down into the car seat and burned the back of my little cousin, who was, again, just a baby. And we didn't really know what happened. Like, I mean, it was just like literally a few seconds. My dad put her up. I remember I got out over on this side, and we heard like the firework, and then the baby started crying. And we thought maybe, she was just crying because of the noise. So like my dad took her and then started bringing her in, and then like my mom came around or something, and then they noticed that her back was burned, and called the cops, and I think called an ambulance. I don't really remember what happened after that, except that I know they got sued. So yeah, this was our nasty neighbors. We never went over there. We really didn't want to get, we weren't allowed or didn't want to go in their front yard to grab the seeds. Oh, I remember one time One time I was like over here, I think it was, and the guy was mowing his lawn, and he literally came running after me with his lawnmower. And my mom came racing at him like I thought she's gonna smack that guy for chasing a kid with the lawnmower. Now, obviously, it wasn't gonna hurt me because it had the blades were covered. It was a electric lawnmower, but oh man, she really gave it to him. And I do believe they cut down their tree. I think later they planted a small tree here. I don't remember for sure. Then this house here, I don't really remember who lived here. I do remember getting the feeling that they were always at work and never home. Because I remember whenever I was a kid, we used to sell like candy bars or wrapping paper for fundraising. And when trying to go to their house, they were never home. And I do remember one time riding my bike down the driveway, and my mom would say I could only go 2 houses and then I'd have to turn around and go back. So I must have been really young at that point. But I remember going up the driveway, and I remember like stopping and like kind of looking around their backyard to see if there was anything interesting to do, and there wasn't. And I remember turning around and going back. And I remember being like right here and thinking, oh my gosh, what if they pull in any moment? And it was like, very quiet, nobody home, and I just started getting like a frightening feeling. And I remember leaving and probably not ever going there again. This was the home of the Knights. There was, I think, 1 little boy and like 4 girls of all different ages, one of them older than me, one of them in my grade. I kind of remember one time playing tag in their front yard and maybe around to the back. I have a feeling that they were latchkey kids. Their parents weren't home and the older sister took care of them, but I don't really remember that much. And then this house here was all lots of trees and overgrown. You couldn't really even see the house from the sidewalk, but I do remember they had multiple of these big trees, and they always had a rusted out car sitting here up here on their driveway. I didn't build that in Minecraft, but you couldn't see into their backyard or anything from the street, and you really just saw a lot of overgrown trees. And then this is the house of the Gulls. And I put these fire hydrants in, by the way. Not the greatest, but are okay. The Gulls had a boy who was younger than me and a couple boys who were older than me. And I never liked the Gulls. I think they felt like they were too good for the neighborhood and kind of snooty. The boys, I didn't really have much like or dislike for the older boys, except that they liked the band Kiss, which I didn't. I wasn't into that hard rocky stuff. And one time they invited all the kids over into their garage, all the kids from the neighborhood over into the garage, and they were putting on a band concert, and they had electric guitars and amps, and they basically they just started making a lot of noise, and all of us were like, this is horrible, and we all left, and we were like, we demand our money back. It was a terrible concert. And then this house here, I actually just built this one now. So this is the house of the Reederers, and in particular, a boy named John. And John is about 1 or 2 years older than me. He was my first friend in the neighborhood. So when we moved into our house, one thing my mom was really good at is getting to meet all the neighbors all the way down the block on both sides of the street, knowing who all the moms were, and arranging babysitting. So at various different times, we had different people babysit us when I was really little. I remember the Varneys had a daughter that babysat us. I remember a house down here that babysat us. And a lot of times, John Reederer's mom would babysit us. Now, and sometimes I would spend the night. Now, my first memory of John actually is on my back patio in the winter, of all things. And he had come over with a something I didn't. I know I was young because I didn't know how to read yet. I was only learning how to like do numbers. He brought over a book, and it was a James Bond 007 role playing game book. And he tried to teach me how to play a role playing game. I remember we made a character sheet. I don't remember ever actually playing. I have no idea what kind of character I made, except I probably made James Bond. And in fact, I don't even think I knew who James Bond was at the time. The other thing that John introduced me to was Star Wars trading cards. And these trading cards, we had like sheaves of notebook paper held together with not thumbtacks but fasteners, and we would glue the trading cards onto the raw lined notebook paper. And I remember one time John left his book, quote unquote book of Star Wars trading cards on our back deck, and like left it there whenever he went home. And it rained, and it was like the next day I went outside and found it, and I put it somewhere to dry. And then I remember trying very carefully to take all the cards off of the notebook paper, and most of them were, pretty ruined. There was like notebook paper stuck to the back of the cards. And I remember offering them back to him, and he didn't want them because they were ruined. And he was upset, but not that upset. And then I kept those cards and mixed them in with my collection, which I don't know what happened to it today. I remember some sleepovers at John's house. I don't ever remember him sleeping over at our house, but I remember some sleepovers at his house where it's the first place I ever learned to eat scrambled eggs. And I only tried them because, I was sleeping over and I don't think there was anything else to eat, but I didn't want to be rude. And it was basically a giant Tupperware bowl. I mean, they must have used at least 24 eggs, and it was a family of 4. And they were so runny, it was like scrambled egg soup. Literally like watery eggs. And I remember tasting them, and it tasted pretty good, but the consistency was horrible. I also remember playing in his room. It was always dark in his room. Like, I don't think he had any lights in his room except for the light coming in the window. And I remember taking wax and like warming the wax up in our hands and then making candles, some sort of a little art project. And I remember playing in his backyard, but we didn't play in it very often. There was a wasp nest up in this tree that I remember very, very well, it being there for forever. And his dad just never got rid of it, so we didn't play in his backyard too much. The folks who lived directly behind him, I will talk about probably at another time. And then one other memory I had about John is that he had these 2 trees in his front parkway. And one day I came walking down the block to see what John was up to. And he had taken a rope, and he had strung the rope up between the 2 trees. Now, I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to simulate this in Minecraft. That looks pretty good. We've got a fence up here in this tree, and we've got an invisible pig in this tree. So what I remember is John was up in this. No, he must have been up in this tree because this tree was bigger. And in fact, you know what? I need to make this. There we go. So I remember taking a sock and climbing up this tree and looping the sock over the wire, or I think it was a wire, or it was a rope. I don't remember. And I remember jumping off and then sliding down between the 2 trees like a zip line. And I remember after doing it once or twice, like the rope sagged so much that my feet like hit the ground and I had to like run. And then I remember the sock breaking because of the friction, and I had to go home with only 1 sock. And I remember another time that I came over here, and John was doing something something over here. And I remember that it was garbage day, so his dad had like a pile of wooden doors and like wooden slats. And I remember I was climbing around on the pile, and for some reason I was wearing brown leather house slippers. I was wearing slippers outside instead of actual shoes, although I don't think it would have mattered. But I remember stepping down onto a rusty nail that went straight up through the bottom of my foot, like kind of where the ball of your big toe is, and just like, but in the middle of the foot, and it went right up through my foot. And I just remember stopping, standing completely still, looking down, seeing like the nail sticking up out of the top of the slipper, and then lifting my foot straight up, and then just turning and running home, sort of limping, but running home as fast as I could. And John and there seemed like there was somebody else. Maybe it might have been a kid who lived down here named Tuffy, or nicknamed Tuffy, who were like, "Where are you going?" And I just didn't even say anything. I just ran all the way home. And I do remember having to getting rushed to the emergency room and getting a tetanus shot. Wasn't so bad, to be honest. Could have been a lot worse. But one thing that John also introduced me to was crazy idea that back here under these reeds, and there were reeds over here, which I haven't built yet, that he had dug tunnels, underground tunnels. He and other older boys from the neighborhood had dug underground tunnels all through the back of the field. And he needed to get some scuba tanks to put underground to keep the fresh air in the tunnels so that you wouldn't suffocate, and to keep the air pressure so that the tunnels wouldn't collapse. And he said there was wooden railroad ties holding up the tunnels. And I obviously never saw them, but any time I rode my bike around these trails, I would always stop over here and try to look and try to find where the secret entrance was to these underground tunnels that he and the older boys had made. And I always, just like had this mental image of these underground tunnels. The last memory I have of John was, I think I was in high school and he must have been graduated. I'm pretty sure he joined the Army either senior year or right after high school. But for whatever reason, I remember him walking from there and kind of walking back this way towards his home. And my friends and I were playing out here. And right about here, he and I got into some sort of teasing argument. I don't remember exactly what it was. And by the way, my friends that I hung out with at this point, they were about 1 or 2 years younger than me. And there was a lot of us, and they didn't really like John. He was always a little too hyperactive, to be honest. But anyway, I must have teased him or something, and he felt very betrayed that I had teased him along with the other kids. And he came running at me and started attacking me. And I remember punching him, and he jumped at me, and I remember very, very clearly that he opened his mouth wider than I've ever seen anyone open their mouth, and he clamped down onto my right shoulder, and like his entire mouth went over my entire shoulder, and he bit me. And I remember hitting him off and then stepping back and then just starting to say, like, "What are you doing? You're crazy. You're nuts." And like, I found it funny, but also kind of frightening that he had gone animal. And it was like, it completely diffused the situation. And then like, I think he ran off crying, but he was in high school. He was so much older than me at that point. And as far as I remember, I don't ever know if I saw him again after that. I know like I said, his dad sent him off to the military, and I don't know. I don't know what happened to those families. I don't know if they still live in the neighborhood or not. But so that was some of my immediate neighbors. Hope you enjoyed those stories.